You're listening to Innovators, the podcast from Harris Search Associates, where we speak with global leaders in education, research, engineering, and the health sciences, and ask them to share lessons learned as they continue to advance the frontiers of innovation and discovery. Today's podcast will be led by Rick Skinner, Senior Consultant.
Life within American universities must be confusing these days. On the one hand, no end of public figures proudly proclaims that American universities are the gold standard by which any other nation's institutions are rated. The World University Rankings, usually the primary source of such publications, include 7 American universities out of the top 10. The other 3 are Oxford, Cambridge, and the Imperial College of London. World class is the adjective frequently applied when describing major research universities in the United States. On the other hand, critics and criticism of colleges and universities are such that they may supplant baseball as America's favorite pastime. The November 15th, 2019 essay, to give but one recent example, by Nelson Lichtenstein of the University of California, Santa Barbara, makes the case that selective private colleges have failed to adapt to a changed America and, here I quote, fallen behind the nation's demographic transformation, unquote. So injurious are those institutions' policies and practices that they constitute, according to Professor Lichtenstein, an abdication, a moral failure, an elitist finger in the public's eye, as damaging to American democracy as the rank discrimination against Jewish, Catholic, and African American men and women of any race and ethnicity that elite colleges used to practice. Harsh words indeed. In today's discussion, our guest will share with us her insights on how change is already underway in the faculties of colleges and universities. Our guest is a genuine authority on these issues, Adrianna Kezar. Dr. Kezar is the author, co-author, and editor-co-editor of 13 books, nearly all devoted to American higher education and organizational change and leadership. At last count, she was the principal investigator or co-PI for grants totaling more than $18 million, again, focused on American higher education and embracing the burgeoning field of STEM education, among other topics. I confess to having lost count of the number and diversity of topics about which she has published articles and monographs when I reached the 8th, or maybe it was the 10th page of her CV. Adrianna Kezar holds an endowed chair as Professor of Higher Education and co-directs the Pullias Center for Higher Education at the University of Southern California. She earned her undergraduate degree from UCLA in art history and her master's and doctorate in education at the University of Michigan, where her career began. She was on the faculty of George Washington University, then the University of Maryland, from which she moved to her present position in 2003. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Kezar for Innovators. I painted a very somber picture of American higher education, perhaps a little unduly dark. So I guess that leads me to ask, how do you describe the current state of affairs in American higher education?
Yes, so I think we have a mixed bag going on right now in terms of the landscape. And I'll start with some of the positive things going on. Mm-hmm. In terms of, any time in the history of higher education in the United States, we have more people going to college than ever before. We were one of the first countries to massify and to have large numbers of low income and first generation and underserved minorities attend college. So on a positive side, compared to many countries around the world, we have created, large access for students to college, and in a competitive way, many countries around the world now are trying to compete to do the same kind of things and
exactly.
have started to do better than us. But we,
exactly.
That has been one of the things that, was largely very strong about the landscape here. We also have done a lot of good work around issues of diversity and equity and inclusion, and yet there's huge gaps still. When you look at the data, I mean, we have made strides for certain groups. I mean, you look at women, for example,
Exactly.
their numbers have really transformed in the past 40 years. So it's not even for all groups, but
Hmm.
certainly we've made incredible progress, and campuses are not the kinds of climates, that they were 40 years ago, where, it was very uncomfortable for women and
Yes.
minorities to go to campuses. And that is not the case for many groups. Again, we still need work, but that's like a significant change. It's something to celebrate. We're doing so much to improve teaching and learning on campus. I mean, you think about faculty just lectured,
Hmm.
most of the, for most of the history of higher education. And we've had incredible innovations on campuses in terms of, flipping classrooms with faculty now putting their lectures online, lots more active and collaborative learning. Harry at UCLA does surveys of faculty.
Hmm.
And 20 or 30 years ago, everybody was still lecturing. And now you have 60-70% of the faculty reporting that they're using what we call these evidence-based teaching practices.
Right.
Huge, amounts of change. And I won't go into all of them, but more on the positive side, like the enterprise has absorbed dozens of changes in terms of, integrating technologies in to support learning and doing assessment of student learning that wasn't happening 20 or 30 years ago, to try to understand, what the value added is of colleges, the ways that we can assess and be more accountable for the work that we do, the way that we collect all this data now so that we do know whether students are succeeding. And, campuses have incredible data infrastructures now to look at the pathways of student success. So I can't even mention all of them, but there's been a lot. I know that higher education, often is not seen as an innovative space, but lots of changes have gone on, just to highlight some. But as you said, there are also a lot of challenges that, it's good that the media holds our feet to the fire, and that there are regular reports about some of the challenges. We have, atrocious, retention rates compared to many other countries that are also letting in their low-income first-generation college students. So there's something going on that we are not able to fully come up with solutions to improve retention rates, even though we've increased access. And some of the things that I talk about are the incredible pressures from a lot of the, they're large, in many ways they are largely, we're external forces, but then they become internal forces that we've absorbed around chasing prestige and focusing on raising money, overthinking, rather than prioritizing improvement of teaching and learning or student success. I've looked at a lot of the changes in the employment on college campuses, which I know we're going to talk a little bit more, but the move to largely contingent faculty and outsourcing staff, all of these things are contributing to some of these, they weren't the beginning of the starts with our problem with retaining students and success with students, but they certainly now are contributing to more failure in that area for higher education. So it's a very mixed bag, the current state. But, I like to look at, it really is fair to say that there are a lot of really important changes going on, as well as some real looming threats and dangers going on.
Someone once said to me that the glass is not so much half empty as half full, is unwashed. And so it may be that we're at that point in time where we just need to polish the glass up a little bit, and it would look a lot better. The other thing that really has sort of keyed our attention to this as an executive firm is that this aging of the American workforce, it's something that's literally brand new. It is true that there was a brief period sometime in the 19th century when the United States was not quite the young upstart. But for most of our history, America has been a very young country, if only by virtue of when it was discovered by Europeans, young if by virtue of the fact that it's only been incorporated as such for a little more than 2 centuries. And most importantly, especially in the 20th, now the 21st century, has been because we have been the target or the home for vast numbers of people who want to come to the United States. They want to come to the United States. There are many of them are young people, and they want to come because of the universities that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So if we look first at higher education in terms of students, as you noted, in the past half century, we increased enrollments from, I don't know, just under 6 million to about 20 million students this fall.
Yeah.
And by any standard, that's an extraordinary growth in student numbers. I did some work in Vietnam a couple of years back, and I was astonished to hear them talking about planning to have, and this is a country of 100 million where the average age is under 28. They were talking seriously about having 65% of their students have college degrees. During that same time, as you noted, we've had some extraordinary changes in who makes up a student population. Women are by far the greatest point of celebration. They not only enroll, they graduate on time more than anybody else. Mm-hmm. In many cases, they're older students, and what used to be the typical college student who lives on campus, goes to school full time, doesn't have a part-time job, I think represents less than 13% of all students in college now. More students are enrolled on a part-time basis, and they will pursue a degree, in some cases, as my brother did, for the better part of 2 decades before learning. So there's some extraordinary things happen. At the same time, the number of faculty members, as it should, they increase from about 500,000 to a little over 1.3 million. Mm-hmm. In that same half century. And the interesting thing about it to me is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics does forecast a 15% increase between now and 2024, and that's higher than the average increase for anything else in the workforce. Now, the average age of faculty has also increased, and that now exceeds that of the rest of the workforce by substantial numbers. Moreover, if Coupa HR, that some of their data suggests that in the support areas, the people who make universities work, those people are older by, in some cases, 15 and 20 years. So what are the implications for an institution, if you will, of becoming an aging professoriate?
Yeah, that's a great question. For as long as I've been in higher ed, we keep predicting these mass retirements.
I failed miserably at it. I failed miserably.
Yeah. So, I mean, we will have retirements. I mean, we've been having some waves of them. And what's happening though, one of the problems that may occur, it has happened on some campuses that I've engaged with, is they do have these waves of big retirements, mm-hmm. right? I mean, it's inevitable at some point that some people are going to retire. And what you get though is this chasm of, those who are still older, who haven't mm-hmm. yet retired, mm-hmm. and then this gigantic bubble of younger faculty. And that can be really challenging for campuses. It's really more healthy for campus when there are more evenly divided generational waves, because you need different senior faculty do mentoring. They do a lot of the curricular development and leadership. Mm-hmm. And they play many of the other kinds of governance and leadership roles on campus, and they take additional service responsibilities like scheduling classes and mm-hmm. things that you really don't necessarily, early career people, if they're on the tenure track, it's not the best thing for them to be engaged in because it will prevent them from getting tenure. And those who are off the tenure track, since we have so many non-tenure track faculty mm-hmm. now, they are teaching. There's not space for them to be doing a lot of this work, which we also haven't figured out who's going to do this work that falls outside of being in the classroom, making sure that the institution runs and has a future and is, an organized enterprise. Mm-hmm. So, but you need faculty at different ages to take on that work. Even if they're off the tenure track, the more senior they are, mm-hmm. still the more likely they are to be able to take on these responsibilities. I do a lot of work on mm-hmm. the non-tenure track faculty. And
they're the only people who know some of the things that are needed from an institutional point of view, how to get that work done.
But a first year part-time faculty member can't do this kind of leadership work. So you do need people in waves, people who've been around for 10 years, people who've been around for 20 years to do mentoring for some of the junior faculty off the tenure track. You still need, an experienced teacher in, chemistry or biology who's going to take, a lead for, a group of adjuncts. So the kind of pattern we have of an aging faculty that isn't retiring in regular waves is problematic. And it was interesting. There was a really, I thought, wonderful article in the Chronicle by a woman saying, basically, please retire. I know that there's a lot of faculty over retirement age, and I was one of them, and I was reluctant, but we're really doing a disservice staying on. And we really need these kinds of waves of faculty. And she made this really compelling argument about how being more selfless about like retiring more regularly and not holding out. And so that departments, like as they succession plan the faculty, and if faculty think about themselves as a part of a more collective, that this, would be better for the overall, institutions, departments, and so forth. One really interesting area of work has been Roger Baldwin's work.
Yes.
Roger's been looking at so what do we, as faculty, have been reluctant to retire, how about we find ways to engage them after they retire, which makes them more likely to retire, which makes us more likely to have these generational waves that can support institutions. So I think really encouraging institutions to come up with thoughtful plans around helping their faculty
I understand completely. Yes.
To retire and engaging them afterwards, which will be much more likely then for us to have a healthy kind of transition of this aging workforce, as well as utilize their assets. But without that, we don't have the great opportunity. And I was going to say the great opportunity now with an aging workforce that if they do retire is we can start to hire, as you allude to in your questions, more diverse faculty, more women, more underrepresented minorities that will much more look like the students. That I think is the great opportunity that, again, it's hard to do that as well when you have mass amounts of people leaving. When you have a slow trickle, it's easier to do thoughtful searches to get a much more diverse faculty.
It's interesting you say that because I think this is an instance where changes in health status and the like have completely sort of gotten off the tracks with how we plan organizations and how we plan for changes in leadership. I'll just give two examples. We get called now for searches for department chairs on a regular basis. There was a time where no one went out searching for a department chair. And the reason seems to be that, number one, senior faculty don't want to do it, and they know they don't have to do it, so they don't. Younger faculty have been told by their elders, for God's sakes, don't get talked into being a department chair, or you'll never be able to make it here. So it strikes me that we're really having a kind of demographic revolution at precisely the time we don't need it, because the way in which we would maintain the enterprise of higher education isn't available to us. And the other thing is, I went back and looked at the data of where the number of positions have grown disproportionate to the growth in enrollment. And it was in non-academic positions. And I started exploring that a little more, and I found out they're mostly people who do a lot of the work that used to fall on department chairs and vice department chairs and assistant department chairs. It's now being done by someone who really may not be an academic at all and doesn't get paid what an academic does, and surely does not have tenure. So again, the most important things we could do right now in terms of student success is probably having more faculty who can spend more time with them. And in fact, that's not what's happening. So it does, you pointed up very well that as Roger Baldwin's talked about, we got to either do something with this, or we're going to face this kind of lemming-like rush to leave the profession. And the question becomes, who will you get to come into the profession? And that kind of leads me to another point. We're in the midst of a full employment economy. I don't even know if it's 3% anymore. It's jobs are plentiful, albeit Wages don't seem to be going up.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you compare that with employment in American higher education, how has higher ed employment changed over the past 20, 25 years? And what have been the effects of those changes?
We have had, I would call it an almost bizarre change. So we moved to a largely contingent workforce, right? This is among
Yes.
faculty.
Yes.
And staff is kind of an interesting, we'll get into
Exactly.
that. But we also have graduate students and postdocs that are a mix of on contingent appointments. And so when contingency came around, the promise when you were an engineer or
exactly.
in some of these other fields of journalists is you get a much higher pay for this insecure labor that you were taking on. So you were not going to be getting benefits or know that you'd have a job for 5 years, but you would be paid a premium so you could offset the insecurity. Well, we have this bizarre situation where we have all of that contingent job insecurity, but instead of the salaries going up, they've gone way down, so that the average faculty member on a part-time faculty job, so that's 52% of the faculty, are making on average $24,000 a year. $24,000, less than most fast food workers.
That's a poverty wage.
Yes, poverty wages. And that's a large number of our faculty, 52%. 18% are full-time non-tenure track. They have a higher salary. It averages about $60,000, but it is less than the tenure track faculty. And it's still, if you think about like all the time spent getting a PhD
and the cost.
So you have $60,000 a year still is not that great for a professional salary. So the salaries and that of course again is less than wages were in the past. So the wages, and then part-time faculty largely don't get benefits, don't have healthcare at many institutions. This is now shifting and changing, thank God, to a lot of shaming by journalists, the press, a lot of advocates who have been fighting, but we have moved into this very strange labor situation in higher ed where we've moved away from full-time employment, moved away from job security, moved away from a living wage and regular sort of support and benefits, as well as all of what I would call the aspects of being a professional worker. So the ability to go to, there's no money to go to professional conferences or to do professional development or to be mentored. So anything that would also be aligned with kind of regular employment as in a profession to kind of update your skills. And then this, as I said, the situation is equally bizarre for staff, where a lot of them have been outsourced, so they're now working for these companies, they no longer work directly for the university, they work through a third party employers so that universities don't have to pay benefits or don't have to be responsible, so they can be let go and hired and fired easier. And that's moved across, it started out with sort of janitorial staff and gardening staff, but has moved straight on into all the sort of mainline staff on campus. And those campuses that do still employ their staff, they are, their contracts have gotten less and less favorable in terms of, cutting down different kinds of benefits, over time. So there's just been this dramatic change, and then a boost in all these new kinds of jobs. So we have forever postdocs now. Like everyone, once they finish a faculty,
they're perpetual.
Yeah. Like you finish graduate school and then you're a postdoc for 5 to 10, now 12 years. The averages are going up and up. It's unbelievable. And the graduate schools are saying things like, oh, well, it's kind of the new, it's the new assistant professor. It's just sort of like trying to normalize that a postdoc position. So that's again more lost income, because the postdocs again average somewhere between 45 and 55,000.
That's the number we've heard.
And you're in this very low paid job with no job security again for a long time.
And you, in order to get another job, you're going to have to compete by putting proposals together to NIH and the like. So the
Yes.
competition for grants has become even fiercer than it was.
Yes.
Somebody used a phrase, somebody said it's the deprofessionalization of a profession. And they suggested to me that of a cartoon that they swear they saw somewhere. And it shows two people overlooking the floor of an Amazon fulfillment center. And they said, my goodness, you look exactly like Amazon. And they said, no, we're the University of blank. And the point they were making is that if you really do think a faculty member can be switched in and out and so forth, then in effect, you've removed it as a profession. The question it raises is, has it deterred people from pursuing careers in higher education? Do you see any sign of that?
So it is just starting to come. For so many years, this was, invisible and not being, not being talked about. So graduate students really didn't understand that there was so much risk, in getting their degree and whether they would be getting a job. But that is starting to change. You see, there was some data that just came out in the last year. It only looked at some of the areas of science, but that more the PhDs are looking to jobs in industry and business, and they are starting to look away from now the academy. So we just there's always kind of a lag between the data that's available and where we are. So I think we're finally starting to see the signs where, and this is probably what it's going to take is people who finish their degrees deciding to move into other areas
to do something different.
Partially forces change.
It reminds me of the old days when I was a young man. It was time to tune in, turn on, and drop out and go do something else. There seems to me there may have been a price to all of this. Well, I think there are many prices to be paid in this case. But one that I think we as a firm worry about a great deal is diversity. The argument for a long time was made that it's the good and moral thing to do. I guess I've always taken the point of view that yes, it's the good and moral thing to do. And if we don't do it, we deprive our students of a kind of lived experiences that we'll never know except in a sort of detached way. Most of us accept it as a good thing that we have diversity. And most people can point to data that are beginning to emerge that says having diverse individuals with diverse backgrounds and lived experiences and so forth, that helps actually improve decision-making for an organization. But still, the demographic makeup of the American professoriate doesn't really reflect even populations that are in other professions. It doesn't reflect it. What is it that's happened that has made it so hard for us to come to the point where universities and colleges look more like the population? Because as you said, this is a country that made a concerted effort to do so. Have we done something wrong in the process?
Yeah, no, I think that is, that's the $100 million question that everyone is asking, because we have put in a lot of efforts. I look at groups like the National Science Foundation, National Institutes for Health, who have invested, through federal commitment to these issues, hundreds of millions of dollars in projects aimed at diversifying the faculty. It has been a major priority. And we have not, the numbers that we continue, the American Council on Education just released some of its recent data looking specifically at race, and there has been very little progress. Some groups, not at all. So we hired very little in terms of African American faculty, Latino faculty. Those numbers are just not.
They don't move. They just don't budge.
Yeah. And so latest numbers not showing improvement. Even I've just looked at the data for the faculty who are off the tenure track. Not much changes there either. It's a fairly white group as well. The only, I guess, a positive on diversity is there's a lot of women that are
there you go. I'm all for that. I'm all for that.
on the non-tenure track route. And that has, also been largely because they didn't feel they could take tenure track positions because they were not
Exactly.
amenable to the life cycle.
Yes.
So I think part of it really has to do to looking back at the faculty role itself, and what we've heard from women for many decades, that has made it challenging for them to go in the academy is the way that faculty roles are set up do not fit the lifestyle of people who have full lives. They want who want to have children, who want to have families. There's this sort of idea that you've got to work 80 to 100 hours a week.
At least.
Yeah, one of these kind of selfless kind of jobs to be competitive. Like you were bringing up, like you got to get the demands are absolutely insane for extremely low compensation. So as we've been talking about how undesirable faculty roles become, right? And you have groups who are looking at this. It's never looked particularly desirable before because of the over demand. And you have a generation now that wants more work-life balance.
And are insisting upon it.
And yet we have things going in the absolute opposite direction in terms of how even, faculty roles off the tenure track are still, there's this expectation that you work way beyond the hours, even though you're not trying to obtain tenure. You're still, maybe you want that full-time role. Maybe you want like some, respect from your colleagues,
Hedge your bets at all costs.
Right?
And the way to do that is to kill yourself by working.
By overworking and overproducing, which is it's not attractive to a lot of these groups. In addition, the climate in many departments, there's been so much research about how toxic the cultures are in many departments. The Chronicle keeps talking about philosophy departments, economics departments, where it's just so toxic. The bullying that goes on. So this is like the kind of underlying sort of climate is driving individuals out who go in, and then the stories that get told make people not want to go into it.
Absolutely.
So the hard part is we're doing better at training people in terms of hiring. Like how do we hire more diverse faculty? So
search committees are much more, you don't have to fight anymore for that. They know that they're supposed to be doing that. But something seems to happen.
We are getting more people in and then they're going out, right? So like we're doing a little bit better on hiring, but they're not staying. People are just rehiring the same people rather than hiring new people. So we have various kinds of trends going on. People seeing academic jobs and not wanting to do them who are diverse, going in and then leaving, going in and just moving around. But what the kind of like the net effect of us not really digging down and saying, how do we, fundamentally change these roles so that they are attractive, and how do we create a climate environment? Because campuses that do have diverse faculties have created those climates. So we know it can be done. It's still not happening at a broader scale,
But I think you touched on something that I think is critical. We've done some searches for Howard University, the HBCU, Harvard. And one of the things that was fascinating to us is we did a search for a dean, and we talked to the students, undergraduates. I think they were all undergraduates. And we said to them, well, this is an important position. And I'm sure some of you are thinking of pursuing an academic career. And there was a dead silence. Somebody finally raised their hand, and she said something to the effect, I wouldn't take these jobs. Here's what I go into my professor's office. He has 3 meetings in the morning. He then has a class, and then he has to do work on a grant. So he doesn't have time to see me. The very thing that made me want to go into this field, students and so forth, I'm not going to be able to do that. And by the way, how much are you going to pay me?
Right.
And you say the salary is going to be $58,000 or something. They say, I've got $130,000 worth of debt. So it may very well be, I think you were getting at, that many groups that might contribute greatly to the diversity have simply made a good, wise choice and said, no, this is not where I need to spend my time. And that means that the challenge of diversity is not going away anytime soon.
No, it is not.
That leads, I guess, my last question for today. I was reading a book. Actually, the book was written by Frederick Law Olmsted himself. Before he became the person who designed all the landscapes in America, it seems like, he wrote a couple of books, mostly based on his tour of the American South just before the Civil War. And at one point, he shared an observation about the differences between people in the North and people in the South. Now, I should say at the outset, I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, so I'm about as Southern as you can get. That he said that he's, in a way, I thought of this as a way to think about those people who are hammering on higher education to change, and those people are saying, we're doing the best we can given what we have. Olmsted said that they, in this case, they say this uneasiness, this passion for change is a peculiarity of our diseased northern nature. The Southern man finds, and notice it's a man, of course, the Southern man finds providence in all that is, Satan in all that might be. Higher education critics are unrelenting in some cases. They do not let up. And they contend that this sector is either going to change by its own means or it's going to be disrupted, to use a verb that's used a lot now. If change is to come, and if the sector is going to make change, who will be doing that? How will they do it? Given all that we've talked about today, who are going to be the change agents? And I'll start by asking a bigger question. Should we try to undertake the kinds of change that are being asked of us?
So, the disruptive changes, ideas, I don't really buy into. Mostly because every time, we can take MOOCs for an example. They come, they go. They weren't really that particularly a great idea to start with, based on faulty assumptions. And, higher education institutions do need to change, are changing, not as fast sometimes as everyone would like to. But if you look back, I'm a historian.
Yes.
You look back in history and you see a lot of changes. People just are not aware of the phenomenal changes that higher education has undergone. It seems like from just a very presentist view that it has always been what it is, but it has not always been what it's been.
No.
And there are some classic actors, if you look back, that have created a lot of these changes. Interestingly, I think one that'll play a larger role than they have in the past are students. I think students, because of our current context, are going to play a bigger role, the outsized role. We are in a neoliberal economy. The customer is all. And because of that larger environment, what students want and desire is going to push for changes. And the students, while sometimes maybe misguided, most of the times they have some really good, important ideas for change. And I think faculty and staff, the more they can partner with, a lot of, when I study change, what savvy faculty and staff do is they partner with students to create changes that they think are important. Whether it be campuses that are more sustainable, that support student learning better, that are more diverse, all sorts of things. Students are going to be on the front lines, and faculty and staff should get behind them, because in many environments they have more power than faculty and staff these days.
They are stakeholders in the truest sense of the word. Yeah,
and faculty and staff, while they should continue to realize they still have power, they don't have the kind of power they used to have in the past. So that's an important difference. But if you look back historically, it's external groups that kind of slowly push through certain policies. The GI Bill, who knew? What was going to happen there that really transformed,
changed the world, changed America at least.
Yeah.
Let's go a step further on that. Can I just ask on one? This is one that really interests me. We chose, it was a conscious choice on the part of America, to take a German research university and wed it to a liberal arts college. Now, there have been people, especially Germans, interestingly, who said that's the craziest thing in the world. And what we ought to do is take these 5,000 institutions and let the 300 of them that are really research universities go off and do their thing. They'll get funded in a different way, and let the rest of the other 4,500 or whatever it is, let them take on the job of educating. You don't see that kind of change coming, do you?
I mean, in some ways, I mean, we to some degree do follow that, in that is the mission of most institutions is education. The aspiration around research that has probably been not healthy, the pursuit of prestige through publication around institutions that don't have a stronger research mission hasn't always served higher education well. So I think there is going to be some pulling apart where we start to say, those that truly have an education mission, should they be doing all of this research and scholarship? Because early on there was this kind of artificial wedding and then all these groups came on, right? Like community colleges, technical colleges, and they weren't a part of all of that initial wedding, but then they all of them started to be affected by this, overarching philosophy. I do think we're going to see more, kind of pulling apart and mission separation. There's been so many efforts through the redefinition of the Carnegie classifications to try to push that separation, that like a kind of a truly kind of unified, similar philosophy and sense of mission across so many different institutional types isn't, or even aspiration, because it isn't even the mission, it's really the aspiration, is probably not healthy for the enterprise.
Kezar, you have great job security, because higher education is at this point in time, is in a place where both critics within and without, you never have to worry about your position at USC. You have lots to study, 18 more books or 10,000 more papers. Thank you very, very much. You've been most incisive in thinking about what are big issues, but which I guess I think we as a firm feel are not that far off before we're going to have to start dealing with them in ways that heretofore have been maybe half efforts. We're going to have to deal with it. On behalf of all of us at Harris, we want to thank you very much for being on with us on Innovators.
Thanks, of course. Happy to do it, and good luck.
Thank you for listening to Innovators, a production of Harris Search Associates. We'll have more insightful conversations with global thought leaders to follow.